This is Monocle on Design, a show where we unpack everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise. On today's special episode produced in partnership with V-Zug, we talk timelessness. In this third instalment of our four-part series, we hear from architect Tosin Oshinowo, designers Jay Osgerby and Simone Farresin, plus V-Zug's Chief Marketing Officer, Natalie Noel. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's special episode produced in partnership with V-Zug, where we'll unpack the theme of timelessness. It's a topic that is essential to the work of the Swiss appliance specialist, which has been producing smartly designed kitchen and bathroom products for more than a century. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll hear from a panel discussion first recorded at Milan Design Week, moderated by Monocle's editorial director, Tyler Brulé, and myself, Nick Manise.
Tosin, I'm going to go to you to start. I want to talk architecture because for me, architecture, more than anything, carries the mark of its time. In my mind, I mean, you look at this space that we're in right now, I don't think you could create this today. When you're working on a project, how aware are you of the time that you're working in, and does this feel contemporary in terms of what you're making?
To be honest, I think when designing, it's very important not to design as a fashionable building. A building should be ageless. When I think of timelessness, I think of ageless. This is a beautiful space. We don't look at it and think, oh, this is boring, this is over the top. With architecture, where you're contributing towards the urban environment, it's really, really important to create architecture that stands out but also recedes gently. It has to have a level of balance. It's about durability. You know, is it going to last? Is it going to be painful on the eye in time? And this is something that really does sit at the forefront of my mind when I'm designing.
Painful on the eye. How are you having those discussions around that? Is that subjective?
To be honest, if you think about it, when architects are designing landmark buildings, you know, some people want to go all out. You know, if we look at, let's say, somewhere like Dubai, and everyone's designed an over-the-top building. At the end of the day, you know, everybody looks the same. Nobody stands out, but it's the simplest of designs that really come to the foreground. And I think that's what's important. Are we creating architecture for grandeur? Is that building going to look ugly in 20 years' time? You know, these are the kind of decisions that we have to make in terms of the materials that we pick and how we approach them.
I want to pick up on something. Of course, you're working on a variety of projects here, some things premiering, but you talked about one brand that you're working with and that they went back to the archive, they went back to the drawer to pull something out. And I'm sort of wondering, was that a design that wasn't appropriate for its time? And then they sort of thought, oh, 2024 is here. That little project that Jay worked on might be right for that moment. I'm wondering sometimes, of course, maybe you can be ahead of your time. And I think especially now, people sort of want the currency, the validation of the mob, wherever that mob might be digitally. But, you know, is that often a tension between, of course, designer and also the client as well?
The project you're referring to is the bottle table for Capellini, which we did, and it feels like another lifetime ago. But I think our practice is very much about creating objects which, right from the beginning, are things that you fall in love with somehow, maybe provoke some kind of memory of something. And because of that, I think that they tend not to be too fashionable. So in terms of the bottle table, I think that was more of a kind of, it cost too much and no one wanted it at the time. And actually, well, they did, but they couldn't afford it. But now I think as time passes, when I look back at the things that we've done, on the whole, they could be launched today, as well as they could have been launched then. And I think for us in our studio and our practice, timelessness is kind of intrinsic to what we search for. Try and find ways into objects that people can understand and hopefully bring something new, normally in the way that you interact with them or that they interact with you, or that somehow respect to change in society as well, but somehow use existing cues to give them a timeless feel.
But how does something also then become a beacon as well, that we actually know that we're in the 90s, but still relevant, and something which you still want at the heart of your living room, you still want that material to clad your building, you know, whatever it may be. Can we still have markers?
Well, I think we're in a very strange age at the moment. We're in the age of archive.
Why do you think that?
Because almost everything that's produced at the moment, I would say, is referencing something that's happened before. And largely in our world of objects, that's because there isn't really a material step change. So we're not in that sort of 1960s plastic Italian moment. We're not in the plywood period, you know, the Alto years. We don't actually have that. So it's actually, conceptually, things are becoming more interesting. and possibly becoming more deconstructive and abstract.
Can I ask as well, you talked about love a little bit earlier and having objects that we love. And maybe this tees up V-Zug really, really nicely. I mean, you're kind of working between, there's technology obviously in your products, but there's also a beauty and aesthetic consideration. Can we fall in love with a combi steamer? You know, can we fall in love with a refrigerator? Do you have these discussions around the table at V-Zug?
Yes, absolutely. I think what makes V-Zug, it's a company that it's 111 years old. So when you reach this type of over a century, it means that you have won user hearts. And what makes it so special is that it is a brand that has become multi-generational. When you look into a V-Zug oven, it's not just an oven. It's the memory of your grandma cooking. It's the time you spent with your parents. So for us, timelessness is a little bit more challenging. It's not like Eames lounge chair that you hand over to another generation, but what you hand over is the experience that you have with that product, almost a certification of the quality that comes with it, and that gives that as a statement that it's something that you yourself can buy in the future, and you have this peace at mind. Both love memories, but at the same time, you know that it's a product that stands.
And I guess I'm picking up on experience there as well and the role that plays. So technology might change, I guess the context might change, but knowing that you can rely on a V-Zug product, is that what really becomes key?
Absolutely. I think for us, it's even a bigger challenge to make timeless products because there's a question of technology. And technology becomes obsolete quite fast. So what we are trying to look into, and I completely agree, materials haven't changed so much. For us, it's a lot of metal and it's a lot of glass. But what changes is the speed into which electronics comes in and displays and all of that. So what we're looking into is how can we create products that can be as components as possible, as disassembled as possible, so that we can commit to disassembling and just taking out the parts that are not working anymore. So there's also this commitment between how do you think the product construction, how can you then break it off into pieces and keep it in as long as possible in people's homes. And the technology part is something the whole industry needs to look at, because if you look into pollution impact, that's one of the biggest ones.
Simone, you're also doing a lot of, I guess, experiential design. There's a lot of exhibitions. I know you're working at Salona. You've looked at that whole layout. Do these sorts of principles translate, I guess, to temporary installations, to temporary experiences? Do we need to be thinking about timelessness when it's a 5-day trade fair?
Well, this is such a complex question because I think that's where timelessness is extremely challenged. I think we cannot address this in temporary spaces only on a design level. It must be addressed on an infrastructural level and on a systemic level, which I would say that generally, I think the best innovation we can do in design is not anymore at the level of the product, but actually systemic innovation. I think disassembling is an example of that. But I would like to think for a second about the idea of timelessness, because I think it is an extremely interesting subject to discuss in an event like this, which is obviously about the new. So the question for me is also, how do you actually make something new and at the same time address timelessness? What to me is interesting is that I think the products I like the most, they were totally rooted in the time they were designed. If I think about, postmodern architecture and design here in Italy, I think about the work of Sozzas and Mendini. I think they survived the test of time not because of stylistic choices. They were totally pertinent stylistically for the time they were designed. But the clarity of the ideologies, they made those objects lasting so long. And I think this is the best way of doing timelessness design. Is not going towards abstraction, which is something that modernist design and architecture explored extensively, but is rather making sure that what you're doing is addressing the complexities of the time you're living in, because that inevitably address the future.
Tosin, we were talking about a residential project you're working on in Lagos, right?
Yes,
at the moment. And I'm wondering how much that conversation comes in with the client. And you're not dealing with a corporate, you are dealing with someone where you have to create a household which is going to endure. I'm not sure if there was a written brief or if it was over several glasses of wine.
Conversations.
Conversations.
Yes.
Did that language ever come into, let's say, a brief for that type of project? And how often is someone actually saying, on line 5, I want to ensure that what is going to be constructed is indeed timeless, as opposed to, I want to make the biggest statement on the street, or I want to make sure that I'm able to develop something which does everything sustainably and should deliver what a project should today, but maybe aesthetically is not going to stand the test of time.
So I don't have clients who would go this far to explain in detail. And most residential clients don't also know what they want. So it's our job to ensure that we give them something long-term and durable. And then also taking key pointers from conversations. I think architects have to be great psychologists. You have to pull the information from the client. You understand how they live now, how they potentially will live in the future, how many kids they have, what kind of home they require, how adaptable will it be, or does it need to be over time? And that's something that we put particularly into the programming of the spaces, but then also thinking about the building on the exterior. It's important to us as well as a practice that our work has a certain aesthetic language, so we want to have that level of continuity, but we also want it to be bespoke, unique for that particular client, but also to last the test of time. A building that in 25 years, if they're getting on, it still looks great, it still works for all their requirements. So I think it's the onus of the architect to ensure you own this and you ensure, whether they ask for it or not, that we put it as part of our service.
So a few of the threads I've got so far, there almost feels like there's simplicity, there's, I guess, systems, there's an element of flexibility.
Adaptability.
Adaptability, exactly. I mean, there's adapting to, I guess, your client's potential lifestyle changes, but what about a building's ability to, I guess, adapt to changing environmental conditions, changing material qualities? Where are you pulling lessons? Or I'm trying to tee you up for something and you know exactly this. Just tell us about Sharjah. Tell us what you were doing in Sharjah.
Sharjah was an exhibition looking at the under-celebrated innovation, building innovations that exist within the Global South, but how we can use these technologies or potentially how they can be honed, adapted, or can be a hybrid existence to modernity and how we live today.
I think what was fascinating was so much of that was about very simple solutions to complex problems.
Very simple solutions using very contextual materials. And then, as we've spoken about in terms of the material palette that hasn't changed, there was a material palette before steel, cement, concrete, that we haven't been exploring and that we need to go back and explore because these had a level of durability and adaptability that we can somehow hone in modernity today.
So maybe, Simone, what we're getting at here is have we got a little bit lazy? Have we got a little bit reliant on, I guess, quick fixes, relying on technology, relying on our ability to mass produce, and we've moved away from quality or, I guess, traditional ways of making? Is that something that resonates with you?
Well, it does, but I would also say that maybe it is not about only sort of finding, again, the new material, but it is rather looking at what is existing, which just very eloquently explained, and understand rather how we can adapt what it exists to the contemporary time. And again, I repeat myself, but I think it is also about looking at the same materials we have been using for centuries and millennia, and I'm thinking of wood, for instance, which is extremely relevant now for design and architecture, but to look at it in the light of the know-how we have today, the necessities we have today, and that leads to completely different results than what and how it was applied before then. So to me, it is never about, again, the new, but it's rather what you do with it that makes the huge difference.
I wanted to ask you, just maybe sort of looking at all of those themes as well, but I come back to, Tosin, let's say one side, you've got the residential client. Of course, you've got private clients, but more, of course, you're dealing, Jay, with corporates, big and small. And I'm wondering, when it comes to the notion of wanting to build out a design language, how much are you in a trap today? So in the same way you talk about, we're in this moment of archive, is the client better informed today? And are we sort of also caught in this sort of Pinterest, Instagram echo chamber as well, which also starts to sort of, in a way, almost narrow the field slightly, because you feel there's, oh, look at all of this reinforcement I have out here, and I'm going to deliver a better brief for you because look at all of this photographic evidence I have here as well.
That's quite interesting, actually. I'm not trying to duck the question, actually, but
we'll come back to it again.
We're very lucky in the fact that we're working with some of the, probably the world's leading manufacturers, and they're led by people generally, not exclusively, but generally, who have their own vision or understanding of how the world should be through their products or their services. And I think the trick, speaking for any creative person, is not to digest that type of content yourself. For one thing, it all goes in, and you don't need it, you don't want it. Being creative is about your own personal discovery and exploring. I refer to the archive movement that we're in at the moment, but actually I don't really want to be part of it. But I think it's important that we respond to what the client is, what they represent, and what materials and processes are available. I think it's really difficult to have this conversation because we're talking about architecture on one hand and maybe fast-moving consumer goods on the other one, and it's a really broad world that we're in. Architecture is a prototype. Each time is a prototype. We get to make loads of prototypes before we then produce. So it's kind of different and challenging. The other thing that we're in at the moment, and you guys are the same as us, we're fortunate to be able to work with galleries too. So we can work on objects which are for really detailed manufacture, and thousands of units. And at the same time, we can make a couple of sort of really bizarre objects where you can really try and experiment, with Gallery Creo, for example, working with Vanini and those sort of people, and kind of push it, be expressive there.
And it's interesting as well, because you don't talk of brands, you're talking about manufacturers.
I don't really like brands.
Yeah, but it's fascinating because these are people who have real skin in the game in a production line as well, which is maybe a different motivation, Nelly, when you talk about marketing, right? Mm-hmm. Because you might have to launch a TV campaign, you might have to launch something on print, you have to launch something on digital, and there is this sort of safety in numbers, still having an educated conversation with the consumer, but also having to go with the current of the time as well.
In our case, we see exactly V-Zug, as you mentioned, we see it as a company. We are a company that is owned by itself. It's a company that by being in Switzerland has a certain advantage. It has never been competing into the trend world. It has never been part of its DNA. I think it's really a company that it's a manufacturing company. We work from our factory, literally. And so when we do anything, we're really committed to how the things are done. We hear the sounds of the machines. We have the service vans that are parked in front of our offices. So we do understand the responsibility of, when we do marketing, we are exploring more the values that we have as a differentiator, because we invest a lot in those things. Having a factory in Zug, I call it the impossible business case somehow. If today we were coming with that, it wouldn't make sense. But when we are there, we have 300 service technician in Switzerland. Alberto the other day said a little quote. He's our chief international officer. He said that there is a quote in Switzerland where we say that the service team from V-Zug gets there faster than the ambulance. And that's because we are committed to making great products. And somehow I think that the marketing then, it comes out of it. The biggest marketing lever we have is word of mouth. And we're not the guys that are putting a lot of money on the table for visibility.
For us, that's one of the most important things. I love working with companies who make their own stuff. It's just great because also they look out the window or they walk around the factory and everybody is carrying also the responsibility of the jobs of the people. And there's something motivating as designers, after all. Design was sort of invented because of the Industrial Revolution. And really it was to try and give you a competitive advantage in the market. And the main motivating function of that advantage is to be able to pay people, to be able to reinvest in your team. And so for us, when we're working on mass production, that's one of our motivating things, to make sure that we keep people in their jobs.
Natalie, you mentioned word of mouth is important, but anyone who spent time in Switzerland, and I think the notion of the ambulance is an interesting one, because there is just the blue van with that logo on it, and you see it all over Switzerland. This is not because the washing machines are breaking down, but it's actually because I can say that in our building we have a vertical spinner in the laundry room, which is 60 years old from V-Zug. Yeah. And someone still knows how to repair that, which is, I think, another aspect of timelessness, is this notion of, should we be able to repair things? And how much that, of course, you want someone to upgrade, and your salespeople are fantastic. They sold me a completely new kitchen, but I said no to the fridge to them as well, because it was a V-Zug fridge that had been there since, the 80s. It's probably not the most ecologically friendly, but it's still doing the trick. The ice cubes are still as they should be. And I think this is what's remarkable in this time. So how does that become a message that, yes, you have to sell products and you have to sustain yourself in the very expensive production center of Zug. And anyone who's maybe flying back from Zurich, I would advise you just sort of knock on the door. Natalie might be there, Alberto, to actually go and see what is happening. In the heart of this country is amazing. But how do you square longevity, timelessness, with having to sell new products?
The contradiction does not really exist. I think that the most important way actually for a company to get to the next 111, that's our challenge. The 111 are behind. And now my job is actually to make sure that the 111 will continue. And at the end, it's happy users. So when you make a product that lasts, yes, this time is the washing machine, but the next one will be the oven and it will last again. Trying to fight for selling new products. For example, this year, we are not introducing any product.
Hallelujah.
We're celebrating the things that it's true.
That's great.
And we're celebrating the things we have already worked on. Those are products that are launch in 2021. In this industry, that might be even old, but they look brand as new. And why? Because in our design language, also what we try to do is we have this principle that it's designed for timelessness and integrates 5 factors. The first one is that we're also suffering from Pinterest, I have to say. In the past, a kitchen would last 30 years, and now it's 10 years. But the appliance lasts much longer. So what do you do? And it was quite interesting. We had the Swiss Kitchen Design Awards, and out of 10 kitchens, we saw that 5 actually had V-Zug products. And out of the 5, 4 were old generation ovens. So that's the first one. How do you design something that will stay when the environment changes? And it's changing faster and faster. The second one is design for repairability. Our products are made of hundreds of components. Imagine a service technician that has a poorly designed interior. For us, the biggest design challenge is not the outside, it's the inside. And so design for repairability, it's key. The third one is designing for disassembling. We have a project that's called the Circular Factory, where we are actually really looking at appliances, dismantling them completely and being able to refurbish them or using the different parts to redesign new appliances out of it. Fourth, it's really the idea of making sure that everything is recycled or as recyclable as possible. And fifth is finding a new home for a used product. And this is also where customer behavior needs to change. And in this sense, that's where I think my job as a marketeer comes in, is opening up the minds of customers that technology products have a second life.
Simone, Jay, Tosi, what sort of education piece do you play with your clients? If people are pushing for something trendy, if they've got that Pinterest board up, how do you have those discussions and I guess try and convince them that...
You probably just leave.
Yeah.
Just let them live in their, whatever, their pink bubble or whatever it is.
I have to say, I have been fortunate enough that I never work with a company that ever showed me a Pinterest board, because I would definitely leave. I mean, but nothing against the tool or what it represents. I mean, we're not talking about that, but it would be such a bad starting point. So generally, the best starting point is when you have a conversation about something. And then upon that, you can structure the brief. Generally, what we do is never accepting just a brief, but redesign the brief. Because at the end of the day, you know better than the client what you can contribute to the company. And then there a conversation starts. And that's where you also understand over the years, because the first product you do with a company, it's never the best, or rarely, because I think you need to also establish a conversation which is much more long-lasting. And then in this conversation, you realize what is your role, what can you do, what kind of path can you open in that specific environment. And I think the challenges that was just described is something that I think we are all working on. Also because, and I want to remind that, it is not only a responsibility of producers, but it is also rights for us citizens to be able to repair something, because many products don't allow at all us to repair them. And this is something that we must work on. Unfortunately, the European Union is creating directives.
So how do you start to encourage brands to consider that? Is it saying, hey, this is going to come into law in a few years? Can you make a money argument? We know money talks.
The way we do it is just simply developing independent work that address this with our research works that we did over the years. And then by doing that, we attract generally clients that comes with those kind of questions. And that is making the work much more effective. Generally, whenever you propose something to the wrong person, it will never work out. So you need to find like-minded people to work decently.
And then hopefully that starts to shift things along if more people see this work taking place.
I guess so. I mean, in the course of a lifetime, you cannot do a revolution. But I think in the course of a lifetime, what you can do is decide what kind of culture you're contributing to. And that's what we're aiming to do, to contribute to a culture we respect.
My thanks to architect Tosin Oshinowo, designers Jay Osgerby and Simone Farresin, plus V-Zug's Chief Marketing Officer, Natalie Noel. And that's all for today's episode. For more design discussion created in partnership with V-Zug, tune into our next special instalment, airing on the 26th of June 2024. Until then, I'm Nick Manise. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.